In June of 1944, the bold actions of one maverick tank commander would briefly turn him into the most famous soldier of the Third Reich. But only 2 months later, this short period of fame would come to a sudden and brutal end amidst the battle for Normandy. In this episode, we ask the question, who killed Michael Wittmann? Born in April of 1914, Michael Wittmann was the eldest of 5 children, who belonged to a Catholic farming family in the village of Vogenthal in northern Bavaria. Having spent his early years working alongside his father, upon completion of his schooling, Wittmann duly returned home, in preparation to one day take over the family business. But like so many others, the Wittmanns struggled to make ends meet in the dire financial aftermath of the Great War. Unable to generate enough profit to pay their rent, Michael's father was forced to repeatedly downsize his farm, until the family finally no longer had a home to live in. Along with his siblings, there was little more Michael could do other than search for employment in the nearby towns and cities. He would sleepwalk through a series of low-skilled and poorly paid jobs, until the arrival of a new political movement in 1936 offered an alternative. Keen to correct what they perceived as the failures of the Great War, the National Socialist government embarked on a massive programme of military expansion. And as thousands of young German men hurriedly enlisted in the army in search of financial stability, the 22-year-old Michael Wittmann was amongst their number. Upon completion of a 2-year initial commission in the army, Wittmann quickly chose to re-enlist in the military, only this time within the Waffen-SS. With a background in farming and heavy machinery, he soon gravitated towards the mechanised wing of the organisation and was assigned to the 1st SS Panzer Division. The young recruit's first taste of action would come on completion of his training as an armoured car operator, when he participated in the invasion of Yugoslavia. His tough and authoritative nature soon saw him allocated as an NCO and assigned to a platoon of motorised assault guns. Wittmann and his peers would later participate in the German invasion of Greece, an unplanned and hasty campaign, proving necessary following the failure of the Italian invasion of that country. Throughout this period, he was repeatedly praised and promoted by his superiors. But it would be upon the Eastern Front where he would finally find fame and fortune. Wittmann and his assault gun unit were deployed to Russia during the German invasion of 1941, finally experiencing the full dangers and horrors of that conflict. Along with the rest of the German army, they fought their way across the vast Russian steppe to the gates of Moscow, before being driven back amidst a harsh and brutal Russian winter. Throughout this period, Wittmann's skill and tenacity would see him selected for an officer's commission, resulting in a short period away from the front line to undergo the relevant training. When he did return to the Russian front in 1942, it was as a tank commander, first in charge of a Panzer III, before later being upgraded to a Tiger Mark I. It was in these vehicles that Wittmann and his crew would claim a total of 117 enemy armoured kills, before they were rotated back to the rear. This staggering kill count earned him the Knight's Cross without leaves, that medal being presented by Hitler himself during a ceremony at his headquarters in Rastenburg. But it would be 6 months later, in the aftermath of the Allied invasion of mainland Europe, that Michael Wittmann would earn a defining role in military history. Having been promoted to company commander, Michael Wittmann and the rest of the 1st SS Panzer Corps were based 165 kilometres away from the Normandy coast when the Allied armies came ashore. Rushing towards the battlefront, but slowed down by constant aerial bombardment, the unit did not make contact with enemy forces until a full week later. On the evening of 12th June, Wittmann and a company of 12 Tigers, of which by now only half were deployable, took up position on the outskirts of the town of Villers-Bocage. The following morning, they awoke to find that the British 7th Armoured Division were in the process of entering the town, prompting Wittmann to launch a desperate counterattack. Deploying only in his own vehicle, Wittmann emerged from cover to find a long line of British vehicles pulled up in a column at the edge of the town. Destroying the vehicles situated to the rear, Wittmann's Tiger then proceeded slowly along this column, methodically dispatching everything parked up ahead. In 15 minutes, the young German tank commander destroyed a total of 19 armoured vehicles and 2 anti-tank guns, before his own tank was then knocked out. Managing to escape, Wittmann hurriedly returned to his company, his report inevitably being seized upon and transmitted back to the German command. Within days, Wittmann was back in Berlin to receive an upgraded Iron Cross from the Führer, with the German media claiming he'd destroyed a whole British battalion single-handedly. But only 8 weeks later, the German army's newest Panzer race would already have become a mere footnote in military history. On the 8th of August, British and Canadian armoured forces embarked on a combined operation to break the German defences that surrounded Caen and Falaise. Having gained significant ground, after several hours these units then paused, awaiting an expected military bombardment of the remaining defences before they proceeded onwards. It was during this stagnant period of the battle that Kurt Meyer, the commander of the German forces in the area, elected to order a hasty counterattack. As part of this move, Michael Wittmann was ordered to lead a company of Tigers out to recapture an area of high ground that had been lost between the two cities. Unbeknownst to Wittmann, he was advancing directly between where 2 waiting Allied units had already taken up position, these being the British 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry and the Canadian Sherbrooke Fusiliers. Within minutes, the German Tigers were being pelted with heavy gunfire from both sides to devastating effect. Midway through passing a radio message back to his headquarters, the line to Wittmann's Tiger was suddenly cut before the vehicle's turret exploded violently. There were no survivors, but to this day, it's also still not fully certain at whose hands the German Panzer race and his crew perished. The diaries of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry detail how at roughly midday, the unit had concealed themselves in a wooded area to await the artillery bombardment. At roughly 1200 hours, the tank crews noticed 3 German Tigers passing by their position to the southwest, slowly heading towards the British lines. The unit commander ordered his Fireflies to engage the Tigers, as their heavier cannons stood more chance of success than the company's standard Shermans. Within minutes, all 3 of the German Tiger tanks had been dispatched, with the turret of the second in line exploding up and into the air, before landing down close to the rest of the wreck. For some time after, credit for the destruction of this Tiger, believed to be Wittmann's, was credited to one of the company's gunners, Trooper Joe Eakins. But in the years that followed, a counterclaim for the kill would soon emerge. On the opposite side of the attacking German forces, several hundred metres away, the tanks of the Sherbrooke Fusiliers were also lying in wait. The Canadian tank crews had used the broken walls and masonry in the grounds of an abandoned residence to conceal themselves. They would later report a column of 5 German tanks and self-propelled guns passing by their position, which did include 3 Tiger tanks. Once again, the unit's Fireflies were ordered to open fire, raking the unsuspecting German column with fire and destroying all of its vehicles. After the war, some of the Canadian crews would later claim it was they that had killed Wittmann, and not the British. But with their company command vehicle having been later destroyed during the battle by an aerial attack, they ultimately possessed no physical reports to support this claim. And so the kill remains credited to Trooper Joe Eakins, other than for one final theory. It would be several days before the remains of the destroyed Tigers were recovered for scrap metal, and the bodies of their crews laid to rest. And during this intervening period, a local resident named Serge Varin approached and photographed the wrecks. Wittmann's tank, identifiable by the insignia number of 7, is clearly visible in these photos, with the turret lying off to one side away from the hull. But mysteriously, there is only one obvious area of penetrating damage visible on the wreck, and this is situated directly on top of the hull, behind the missing turret. It would not have been possible for any of the Allied tanks to have been able to score a hit from directly above, which raises the possibility the hull was caused by a third party. During the course of Operation Totalize, more than 240 Allied Typhoons were roaming the skies above the battlefield, and all claim numerous kills. Some have theorised that the hole in top of Tiger 7's hull could only have been caused by a rocket fired from one of these aircraft. That projectile then triggering a fire within the Tiger that resulted in a devastating explosion once the tank's ammunition detonated. But there are no obvious reports of the destruction of enemy armour that match the circumstances as offered by the witnesses on the ground, with survivors reporting that prior to the fatal explosion, the turret of Wittmann's Tiger had been hit and its main armament disabled, and it is possible that an internal fire was then caused by that, without actual penetration. This leads to the theory that the hole in the rear of the vehicle could similarly have been caused by the explosion, the same one that blew the disabled turret off and up into the air. In the aftermath of Wittmann's passing, German propaganda claimed the Allies had deliberately hunted and assassinated the tank commander in revenge for Villers-Bocage. But analysis of wartime records show that none of the Allied units involved had any intelligence that Wittmann or his unit were operating within the boundaries of Operation Totalize. Following the battle, the bodies of Wittmann and his crew were removed and placed in an unmarked grave until they were eventually recovered by the German authorities in 1983. During the post-war era, many dubbed the young maverick the Black Baron, a homage to the nickname of Manfred von Richthofen from World War I. But debate still rages amongst military historians as to whether Michael Wittmann was indeed a genius or merely very lucky. Some experts highlight that the majority of his 138 confirmed kills were claimed in Russia, fighting inexperienced enemy crews in inferior vehicles. They similarly dismissed the high number of kills claimed during the assault at Villers-Bocage, which were accounted for by unoccupied or stationary Allied vehicles. Regardless of how his successes were achieved, or who ultimately ended his life, Michael Wittmann remains an active part of military teaching to this day, perhaps earning him the right to be forever known as the Black Baron to both current and future historians.